You want me to let you know?
Yeah.
It's rolling.
Oh, it is. Okay.
You're live, Mr. Stroughmatt.
I'm already live.
Wait, so you put it on when I was hugging you?
I put it on to show your love, yeah.
Okay.
Just for Daddy's purposes. He can edit it out.
I'm Dennis Stroughmatt, and I'm here on behalf of the Missouri Humanities Council Speakers Bureau. But today, if you don't know this, I am at the Osage Beach Public Library today, and basically the room is almost empty except for my family. I have my family here. They're going to be helping with, there's Reagan. Hi, say hello everybody. Yeah, they're here. There's Ariel, and we call her Biddy, and then there's Reagan, and there's Jennifer Stroughmatt, and so they're helping with the camera today. So this is going to be a little different because I'm used to doing live programs in front of a live audience, but today we're kind of testing this. You guys are the guinea pig for if you're patrons and you come to the Osage Beach Public Library. Well, guess what? You guys are the guinea pigs today because we're going to be doing this. Something I've never done before quite like this, but why I'm here is I'm here to talk about Missouri French music. I'm here to talk about the Missouri French Creole population, the history of the Missouri French, some of the songs, some of the history, why the French are here, and well, the first question is, who am I actually talking about when I talk about the Missouri French? Usually when I do programs, people say, Missouri French, who are you talking about? What Missouri French? Where? You know, well, first of all, let's just get the first thing out of the way. Everybody probably has heard of St. Louis, Missouri.
No.
No, you haven't.
No.
You haven't heard of St. Louis, Missouri. Well, if you haven't heard of St. Louis, Missouri, you've been living under a rock. So, Jennifer's been under a rock. So, but St. Louis originally was Saint Louis, actually founded in the 1760s. But here's the thing. That's one of the later French towns, one of the later French villages actually founded in Missouri, which was originally called the Illinois country. Now, fortunately today, because I'm not live, nobody can throw anything at me from the state of Missouri. But you probably didn't know this, but at one time Missouri was Illinois.
Woo-hoo!
And I'm sure there's probably people going, boo. So, but see, I'm from Illinois. I'm from the state of Illinois. And yeah, I know, they let me across the river today. Boo. They let me across the river today. Excuse me. So.
That's not COVID, I promise.
Yeah, it's not. So anyway, but it's going to be really fun because one of the things that you will learn is that Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana are all connected. This was all part of really not one state, but kind of like one territory at one time. That was the colony, essentially, of Upper Louisiana, or the Illinois country, to put it more succinctly. We were called Le Pays des Illinois. Now, how do I know about some of these things? Well, we'll get to that. But I wanted to play that first song for you that we did. It was something called Cara de Sed, which is one of the old French songs that I actually learned in southeast Missouri. A lot of the music I've learned, a lot of the language that I speak, yes, I speak a French language. It's a different French language. It's not standard French. It's a different French language we call just Illinois French or Creole, Francais Creole. And it's some people use the term Pawpaw French. Some of it is Pawpaw French. Like I say, there again, it depends where you're from, because it's not just Missouri. We're not talking just Missouri. Missouri is a big part of it. In my personal story, my personal background, Missouri is a huge part of it. But if I say it's only Missouri, then I'm also leaving out some of my friends in some of the villages in Illinois, like Prairie du Roche, Illinois, or Cahokia, Illinois, or Vincennes, Indiana, because these are also a part of what was the Illinois country. And so for those of you that are of French heritage in Missouri, or French Creole heritage more specifically, you are related to the French in the state of Illinois. You're related to the French in the state of Indiana. You guys are all part of really one big greater village. It's one huge community that's just really more or less divided by rivers and state lines, which in our case are the rivers. So let's go back. Why do I speak any of this language, any of this French? Well, a lot of it, for me personally, I just tell you a little bit of personally my story, which is it begins about 30 years ago when I was a student at Southeast Missouri State University in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. Now, growing up in Southern Illinois, I was very familiar with the French in Vincennes, Indiana. Of course, when I was a child, when I was basically the age of my girls, we used to go to Vincennes, Indiana all the time, but we didn't really know that much about the French background. It was more or less thinking more, I guess you might say, more of like the Revolutionary War background, and which is great, because I mean, that's a big part of the history. And I knew about some of the German background in Vincennes, but I didn't know about really the French background. So when we would spend time in Vincennes going to the George Rogers Clark National Park, actually one of the things that led me into this was being very curious about the French mannequins, the French Creole mannequins that were actually in the museum at the George Rogers Clark National Monument. I was very curious about the French, and so I was told that, you know, the French had some part in the Battle of Vincennes. Well, yeah, a huge part of the Battle of Vincennes. In fact, not just the French from Vincennes, but the French from Kaskaskia, what was Kaskaskia, Illinois, Cahokia, Illinois, including the Missouri French. This was all a part of it. And so having all this in my background would eventually lead to me later in my teens when I had the opportunity to move to Missouri, and I ended up going to school, Southeast Missouri State University. It was there in the very first week that I was in school that I had a conversation really about some of my history, my own background, and my interest in the Illinois French, I guess you might say, the small I. Well, maybe we could say that for Illinois country, or the paint is getting away. And my interest in the French, Greater French region, it was talking with a professor, Dr. Frank Nickel. And Dr. Frank Nickel mentioned to me in our discussions, he said, yeah, he was very familiar with the French in this part of the country and the history. And I made a comment to him about the fact that I was so interested in learning more about our French, and the fact that I love the architecture that we have. The architecture is the some examples, small examples we have in Vincennes, some of the examples in southwestern Illinois, especially, but I was especially interested in the architecture of St. Genevieve, Missouri. And I mean, who wouldn't be? I mean, it's basically the jewel of the Mississippi. Mm-hmm. And yes, it is. And I mean, it's one of the most beautiful towns really in North America. And I thought that was great, and I still do. And I mean, I'm very much fascinated by the architecture, but I was more focused at that point. It's like, well, what happened to the language? You know, what really happened to the French language? You know, where did it go? Why is it that you go to French Creole towns, you know, in Missouri, or, you know, Cape Girardeau, Missouri, You know, or in St. Genevieve, you go to these towns or you go to Prairie du Roche and you really don't find a large population of people speaking French. I mean, what happened to them? You know, did the French population just leave and go somewhere? And Dr. Nichols said, oh no. He said, the French didn't go anywhere. He said, other than, you know, a lot of the families that were in Vincennes, he said some of them moved, you know, out of Indiana. Some of them ended up in Missouri. Some of them stayed in Vincennes. Some of them already had relatives who were living in Cahokia, Illinois, and in Prairie du Roche, Illinois, you know, what would become Prairie du Roche, Illinois. And of course, there was a large contingent of them who had moved to southeast Missouri. And he said, especially, he said, around an area known as the Old Mines. The Old Mines. And he suggested that I find out more about this Old Mines region, because I was like, well, no one speaks the language anymore. And he says, that is absolutely not true. And he said, no. He said that what I've always heard, he said, the myth that I've heard is that people still speak French in the Old Mines community because of the party line phone system. For those of you that are watching out there right now, some of you are probably shaking your head. Oh yeah, I know about the party line phone system. Some of you watching this are probably going, no, I don't know what the party line phone system is.
The original Facebook.
I was going to say, it's like the original Facebook, exactly. That was Jennifer. Or you could say it was like the original Zoom meeting. I'm just learning about Zoom meetings here recently because of COVID-19. We're all doing Zoom meetings these days. So it was kind of like a Zoom meeting. So if you're not familiar with the party line phone system, Dr. Nickel kind of joked about it a little bit, but it was true in the sense that one of the stories was that people in the Old Mines region still spoke French because a lot of the older people in the area would speak French on the phone, because there would be different homes connected. They would be connected to the same circuit, essentially. And so what would happen is that they had different rings. They had different rings in their homes. And so it's like somebody might have double rings, or they had 4 rings, 5 rings. And so they would know to pick up the phone. But the thing about it was other people could listen into the conversation because of the rings. Well, okay. That meant if you picked up the phone, you could potentially listen to somebody else's conversation. And one of the ways to keep people out of that conversation was to speak French. And so that was one of the stories that he told me about. But he said, Dennis, he said, you need to go to Old Mines yourself and find out about this population. Find out about who these people are, and maybe you'll hear some of that French spoken. So I took off just a few days after that, immediately headed to Old Mines and started making stops, several different places. I stopped at grocery stores, and I stopped at gas stations, asking people if they spoke French, anyone who spoke French. I had actually taken a couple classes, or one class in French. I didn't do very well. I got like a C in French, because mainly I was not really that interested, I have to be honest with you, in standard French and in community college. And so I thought I would like maybe try out the French on somebody who spoke Missouri French, whatever that sounded like. I didn't know what it sounded like, but I was hoping to find it. So ended up in Old Mines and making all these different stops, and after many stops I eventually found someone who told me where I could find people who spoke the French language, and it was at the parish workers in Fertile, some of the area north of Old Mines, just south of DeSoto on Route 21. And so I went there, and there were ladies out on the front porch that afternoon. It was a Friday afternoon on Labor Day weekend. And so I stopped there, and I didn't want to wait. I just walked right up to the porch, and I said, "Bonjour, comment allez-vous?" And of course, they all start speaking to me in French, and I don't understand a word of what they're saying. And because it didn't sound to me like the French that I had heard in the class I had taken. And I was amazed that this was a French, though this was our real French. I guess you might say, in the reality of our reality of the Illinois country, this was our French. I was fascinated. They let me sit down with these ladies. They let me sit down and ask questions. And of course, I started asking questions to them like, so where are you from? And one lady was like, well, I'm from Cadet. I was like, okay. And I asked another, where are you from? And she's like, well, I'm from Richwoods, and another one's from Old Mines. And well, I was confused because I thought they might answer and say, well, I'm from France, or I'm from Canada, or I'm from Louisiana, because I couldn't imagine at the time that we had this strength, this powerful French connection right here. And that led me down a road that I have traveled for almost 30 years of the music. But what they did was they invited me to start making connections with people in the community, start going to house parties that they called a bouillon. So for those of you out there that don't know what a bouillon is, now think about this. If you've ever gone to the store and bought bouillon cubes, you know what a bouillon cube is. You can get it in a jar, and they got the little, little capsules, the little packets. You pop it in your water, and so you got your soup. It's like before Campbell's canned soup. You can take this and make your own soup. So a bouillon is a party. So it's kind of like essentially these bouillon cubes. It's like there's a party in every cube. And that's it. I know, that's a really bad joke. So anyway.
I made it up.
Yeah, that's right. There we go. That's Jennifer's. So, but yeah, so there's a party in every cube. But I start going to these bouillon parties, and I was fascinated because it was there that I began really learning about our French music, and I was introduced to a great fiddle player in the area, a barber by the name of Roy Bouyer, who was in Cadet. And so I'm going to come back to the history, a little bit of the history of Old Mines in a second, but I want to play a song for you. This was really the first song that I ever learned to play, period, on the fiddle. And of course I learned to play it the way Roy Bouyer played it, and I would come to find out that it was a little bit differently than everybody else played it, but this is the way we do it, French Creole style. Some call it Red Wing. In French, we're French style. But I just want to give you a little bit of a snippet of the way that we do, if you would say, the way I learned it outside the community. Because what happened was, Roy told me, he said, when I was learning the song, he said, don't go enter in a fiddle contest and try to win a fiddle contest playing that song. Because he said, we do it differently. And I said, well, why is that a problem? And I know I was just a learner. But I was like, why is that a problem? He said, well, because fiddle contest judges don't speak French. And so, sure enough, like a year later, I entered a fiddle contest. And I played the song, and I lost. And in fact, the contest judge even came up to me afterwards and asked me what song I was playing. Because he said, that wasn't Red Wing. He said, that didn't sound like Red Wing. So this is Red Wing as more like most people know it. So again, I'll show it to you one more time, but I'm going to play it more, we'll call it Anglo style, Anglais, and then I'll go back to the French style again so you can kind of see the difference. of the difference between the two. Because what I found out at these house parties and the bouillons and going with and learning from the fiddle players is that the fiddle music is dance music. It's not just to be listened to, but it's to be danced to. And the fiddles themselves are not only the melody instrument, but they're also the rhythm instrument. Now, okay, so I've talked. Let me talk a little bit about that. So let's go back to Old Mines itself. So why the French? Why here? So because usually when people think about, well, if you think about Missouri as being a French area, you know, the bicentennial is coming up. That's coming up very quick. You know, if you think about Missouri at all, when you think about its founding, you know, the French, even at the founding of the state of Missouri, the French were still a big part of the state. Why is that? Why were they here? Well, a lot of times people, when they think about the French in Illinois, if you ask why were the French here, you might maybe come up with two answers. Usually the first two that you jump to are be fur trade. Some people kind of jump, well, that's the reason the French were here, was fur trade. Well, that's definitely a part of it in some ways. Another reason, well, what about the church, the Catholic Church? That was another part of it. Because you had kind of different groups within the French government in the late 1600s who were looking for something. Well, they were looking for different things. There were different groups looking for different things amongst the French government. You had the Catholic Church. They were looking for souls, essentially the Native American population. So they're looking for ways to expand their reach, you know, the reach of the church in the 1600s. They had already come down. Of course, the French first arrived here essentially around 1604 is when the French first come to North America and really set down roots. They eventually, over the period of several decades, by the late 1600s, have come down the St. Lawrence River until they've gotten into the St. Lawrence Valley, until they've come to the Great Lakes. They are essentially in Michigan by this point, by the 1670s, and they're looking for something. Besides the Catholic Church looking for what their purpose was, the French government was looking for other things. You had people looking to expand possibilities with the fur trade, but you also had people looking for a westward passage. They were looking for a passage essentially to the East Indies. They're trying to find a way essentially to what is now modern China in that area because they believe that there's some great river route. There's some route, inland sea. They don't know. They don't have GPS. They can't look on their Google Maps. So they can't see, you know, how to get, you know, from one place to another. They just have their star charts and they have the cartography, you know, the cartographers, you know, they're making maps along the way as they're exploring the territory of North America and New France. And New France really is originally is kind of everything west of the Appalachian Mountains, all the way up through the Alleghenies, all the way up through Pennsylvania, New York, going to what is now modern day Canada. You have to realize at that point, the British colonies were pretty much socked up against the eastern seaboard. Everything else was the French up until you got to the Rocky Mountains, then it got to the Spanish. So the French, where there weren't a great number of them here, they owned a big chunk of land in North America. And so they had a lot of sway to try to find things. So they're trying to find a westward passage, but there's another thing they're looking for too. And that's the shiny stuff. If you've got shiny stuff on your hand, or you might wear shiny stuff in your ears, or shiny stuff hanging off of you, they're looking for gold. Because there had been a story, there had been sort of this mythology that existed from the Spanish that is still existing in the 1600s, late 1600s, that there was gold somewhere along a great river in what was essentially the central part of what is now the United States. So there are all of these different reasons that the French have to find what is the Mississippi River. They want to find the Mississippi River and they want to get down that river because they have reasons, a business, religion, a lot of different reasons. Government, you know, the government of France, they want to get down this river because they want to expand their territory, make that mark. So this was what brings the French eventually in here through Marquette and Joliet And of course, if you're familiar a little bit with the history of the French in Illinois, you'll know that they came down the Illinois River, eventually getting onto the Mississippi River, making it all the way down to essentially what would become Le Poste des Arkansas, which is right across from Memphis, Tennessee, or essentially West Memphis. So let's go on to the 1700s. So you have a time period of which the French eventually make their mark in Illinois, which is 1699, and then you have the founding of Kaskaskia, Illinois, which is kind of like the modern day Atlantis in some ways. And why I say that is because Kaskaskia really kind of like fell into the Mississippi River in the 1800s. There's kind of a long story about that, so I won't go into it maybe some other time. But you also have the founding of Cahokia, essentially in the same year, and it's kind of a back and forth between Cahokia and the Kaskaskia area, who was the oldest. So this is where the French come. They lay their claim. They lay their claim to the area along the Mississippi. Well, they exist fine, and they're doing well, and they have prospectors that come in trying to find some of that gold in the early part of the 1700s. They don't find anything in what is essentially geographic southern Illinois, but they come over into Missouri, and they're looking all along essentially the Ozark mountain range. They don't find gold. They're looking for gold, they don't find it, but what they do find is kind of like, when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. They don't find gold, but they do find iron, they do find lead. And so for the French, they have to figure out what becomes reasonable. What can they work with? Lead. They begin lead mining operations. A lead miner, essentially a miner from Picardy, France, by the name of Philippe Renaud, brings a crew to southeast Missouri around the old mines region in 1723. They set up shop north of what is Prairie du Roche, Illinois now, right next to Fort Deschartres, and they begin operations working seasonally. This begins the process of bringing in the nucleus of what creates the Illinois country. Because you can have miners, you can have the church, you can have fur trade, but what brings it is the nucleus of the family. When you start bringing the family together, when you start seeing families develop, this begins developing culture. It begins creating a culture that, while similar to its Canadian connection, and essentially coming down through Canada, and being similar to the French, because you have to remember, the French are also in southern, this will now become a part of Louisiana. Southern Louisiana also, you already have the founding of towns in southern Louisiana. Eventually, places like St. Martinville, Louisiana, you have eventually New Orleans, the Attakapaw Parish, this area in southwest Louisiana, Biloxi, Mississippi, Mobile, Alabama. You began seeing a population develop and a culture develop in lower Louisiana. But ours develops differently in some ways. You see the language develop differently. You will see music develop differently. And so the old mines area will be a great example of how the nucleus of the family will be so important in developing that culture, the French culture, because as families grow, as you bring the miners, essentially what happens is you bring farmers coming into southern Illinois. It's essentially why the area of southwestern Illinois was kind of a breadbasket, you might say, to lower Louisiana during different time periods. So this will be very important. And so how that affects me personally is when I go into the old mines area, I begin learning some about who these people are. What is our ancestry in that sense? Musically, what is our ancestry? What is the language? How is the language important? So I want to go back and play some more songs here for you, because I don't have a whole lot of time, so I want to do some more playing rather than just talking. So I want you to have an example. So like I say, the very first song I did was a song called Cara de Sed. And Cara de Sed is actually a song that really came over sometime in the 1760s or 1770s, and it came from Brittany and Normandy, France. Well, Red Wing is just an old American style song, but I'm going to do another song for you. This is one that also potentially and most likely came from Brittany or Normandy in France. And why is this important? It's important because it has a great effect on our language and the music. It's a song called D'où viens-tu bergère, or Quoi vas-tu bergère, depending on which village you're from. If you're from Vincennes, you're from Prairie de Roche, you're from Old Mines or St. Genevieve, different versions of the song, but the melody is the same. Most of the words are the same. It's just slight variations. Now this is a Christmas song, so this hopefully, I know it's already hot out and everything, but hopefully this will put you in a Christmas mood. And they call this a chanson à la bande, which is also known in Breton Gaelic as a candy scan. Response song. I'm sure that one probably puts you in a Christmas mood. Kind of reminds you of Silent Night, you know. So, but no, I know, not really, that's terrible. So anyway, D'où viens-tu? That's a very good example. It's one of those songs. Now, but I'm going to change gears and I'm going to do a waltz for you. Now, some people think that this actually would have been done or danced as what you would have called a mazurka. Now, let me and reiterate again, these are songs that I learned not only from Roy Bouyer, but also from Charlie Paget, or Charlie Paget. He was another great fiddler in the area who I learned a lot of songs from. And I learned from singers in the area. Like Annie Paget was a great singer. And now this is one that I learned from a lady by the name of Ida Portel. But it has different versions of it too. And actually in my studies, studying some of the French music of Vincennes, Indiana, I would also find this song in Vincennes, and I was always curious about its background. Still don't know if it's exactly where it came from, but Miss Ida, I'd ask her about the history of this song. It's a song called Grand-mère se plaint, which means grandmother complains. Where the song was from, and she didn't really know, other than it just came from the east, somewhere from the east. Well, Vincennes is technically the east. And the story essentially tells the story about a grandmother who complains. She's cold and she's hungry and it's the middle of the winter. And in the story, the grandfather who she's complaining at, she wants him to go out and find some food. Well, you're getting more in this video than usually I'll give away immediately, because I make people have to think about it for a while. But why would the grandfather, he never comes back in the story. She sends him out of the woods, so why doesn't the grandfather come back? You know, it's a good question. So it's the middle of winter. He's hungry. She's hungry. She sends him out in the middle of the woods. Why doesn't he come back? Well, I ask this question to a lot of people, just to try to take a wild guess. A lot of times people will say, you know, he got eaten by a bear. I've had people yell, he went to a casino, you know, and it works out, you know, say for example, this song is like from Vincennes. If you float down the Wabash River, you end up into the Ohio River, which takes you to Metropolis, Illinois, where you can go to the casino. So, I know that. I know, that's true. So anyway, that's bad. Okay, all right. So
Take
even
your
my
savings
girls are looking at me and they're like, "Oh, Dad, stop." So anyway,
Terrible.
what happens is he gets eaten by a wolf. He gets eaten by a wolf in the song, but the grandmother is still complaining about the fact that she's still cold and hungry and didn't care what happened to the grandfather. So we'll do a little bit of this song. Now this, like I said, this was originally most likely done as like a mazurka, not in a straight waltz, but we kind of straightened it out. And then we end up with a really nice dance song, something called Grand-Mère se plaint. I have to stop right there because there's a really important part. You have to say, don't cry for the grandfather. That's what it said. Pleurez pas fils pour vieux grand-père. Because something's going to happen to him though. Pleurez pas pour mon vieux grand-père. Pleurez pas pour mon vieux grand-père. Chomp. Oui, les ont mangé. Burp. Oui, les ont I even cracked Jennifer up on that one. So anyway, yeah. Grand-Mère se plaint. Very good example. That's an old, most likely an old song from Vincennes, but it's one that I learned in Old Mines. There again, Old Mines, Missouri, yes, kind of being a receptacle of tradition and culture coming from other parts of the Illinois country. But I want to be specific about something that to understand. Again, I mentioned how the different areas have their kind of their own different ideas. And one of the songs that's a good example of that, besides Grand-Mère se plaint, is another one is that the song that is really like the oldest song in all of the Illinois country that I know of. And in fact, this may be the oldest song in all of, well, the oldest French song in all of North America. A song that is centuries and centuries and centuries old. It has to do with one of the oldest traditions, continual traditions, that actually happens in the Illinois country every year. And this is kind of where I want to end my program today, is talking about the carnival. Now, of course, we're in the middle of summer right now. We're outside of the carnival, have nothing to do with the carnival right now. But it'll come back again. It always does. And every year, essentially every year after Christmas, 6 days after Christmas, you kick off essentially the season of the carnival with La Guillonnée. La Guillonnée being one of the strongest traditions, something that has maintained itself beyond generation after generation, from parents to children, from grandparents to parents to grandchildren, great-grandchildren, continuing on generation after generation. Essentially, it's an old French tradition, and well, actually, it's very similar traditions that you find in England, so it may be possibly an old pagan tradition that essentially gets wrapped into the Christian tradition of beginning the season of Carnival that eventually ends up with Mardi Gras and the season of Lent. But it begins with, on New Year's, people going house to house, begging for food. They paint their faces, they put on masks, and they beg for food, sing for food, but it's not just to eat the food right there. It's not just to drink the drink that they're given. It's to ask for charity so that they can bring everybody together in the communities. Rich, poor, old, young, they all come together during the hardest time of the year. Now, like I say, this happens 6 days after Christmas, so it's New Year's. You know, New Year's, they will do the song. 6 days after that, they have the 12th night, or the 12th day of Christmas, essentially, in which then they will have the King's Ball on the 12th night, and then they will crown the kings and the queens, essentially, who will then rule through the season of the Carnival until you get to Le Mardi Gras. So this song I want to do for you has anywhere between like 22, 32 verses, depending on the village. And it's funny, I won't get into it, but I'm going to just say that there have always been disagreements between the villages on which are the correct lyrics. But let me let you in on a secret. They're all correct. They're all right. Because every village has their own version. Every village has their own version. Even within the Illinois country, you can go 30 miles and there will be a little bit of the difference, because that's the cool thing about the Illinois country French, is we're all unique. Everything about our, even from one village to the next, music, language, food, the way that you approach even a get-together, whether it is a bouillon or if it's a soirée, or, you know, different ways of saying it. You know, there's always different ways. And so I will do this song for you. And I'm not going to do it all because we don't have enough time. I'm looking at the clock, and I'm probably going to get shut off by YouTube anyway. And yes, and my daughter Ariel over here is hungry, and she's saying, "I'm hungry, you've got to feed me." So, anyway, so I'll do this song. But what I want to say before I end, though, I hope you've learned a little bit. I wish I had 2 hours, but I don't. But if you have questions, you can find me. You can find me at my website, which is creolefiddle.com, or you can go to Facebook, Dennis Stroughmatt. You can find me there if you have questions. I'm not going to call myself like the Center for French Colonial History or anything, because I'm not. But I can answer a few questions if you like. But let me tell you, when you've got time and when you can, if you want to find out information more about our French history, more about the music, please contact the Old Mines Area Historical Society. They've got a treasure trove of information. You can also contact the Center for French Colonial Life, in St. Genevieve, Missouri. You can also talk to them. Essentially, the national park now is in St. Genevieve. You have wonderful resources in St. Genevieve to find out more about our French heritage. There's a lot of possibilities. Go to Vincennes, Indiana. Go to Prairie du Roche. Go to the Arch. Go and see the new exhibit at the Arch about our French history. That one's a cool one. And it's very exciting to see the new exhibit. And let me play the song and then I'll end it and say a few more things for you. But like I say, there again, you can find me at creolefiddle.com if you have any questions. Through one verse. So anyway, I want to thank you, and I hope you enjoyed a little bit of the information today. I hope I didn't bore you. I hope that it wasn't too weird today recording it. It was very different for me, a very different type of program. And of course, because of COVID-19, that's kind of where we're at, and that's okay. We can do this. And like I said, I want to say a big thank you to the Missouri Humanities Council. They made this possible today for me to be here. You just see a big white screen, but we're here at the Osage Beach Library, public library. And so I want to say a big thank to the Osage Beach Public Library for hosting me today. And also going to say a big thank you to my family, a big thank you to my wife, Dennis Stroughmatt. Today she's the director for the program. She's sitting there looking at me going, you're done.
No, it says you did great. Shoot. You're done. I'm done. I'm hungry.
Okay, you're done. All right, get the hook. So anyway, and I'm hungry. So again, thanks everybody, and we hope you enjoyed it. And like I say, if you have any questions, you can contact me or contact some of the different programs in St. Genevieve, the Arch. Also, there's a lot of different possibilities online for information. So there again, I'm going to sign off and
Creole Fiddle.
yeah, creolefiddle.com. But la dernière chose que tu as dit, c'est à cette heure, moi je veux pas pour entendre le français qu'on parle. Tu vas voir si c'est notre français indifférent, si l'autre monde, si dans la France, si dans la Louisiane, le Québec, si notre français c'est différent. Mais si c'est les français des popos, c'est dans la séminaire, les français d'Illinois. So c'est tout, okay? So you can see, you can hear, it sounds a little bit different. It's not exactly the same. So thanks again, merci encore.
À
Moi,
bientôt.
j'espère. Ouais, mais à la prochaine fois. Et j'espère que tu as eu un bon temps. Merci. Au revoir.